Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep today into the incredible, complex, and ultimately tragic story of Ayrton Senna, one of the most iconic figures in racing history.
And our map for this journey is the biography, The Life of Senna, by Tom Rubithon and Keith Sutton. These sources offer, well, a real treasure trove of insights into the man behind the helmet.
Absolutely. Our mission in this deep dive is to pull out the most compelling details, maybe some surprising nuggets from these pages.
Yeah, to give you a richer, more nuanced understanding of Senna, not just the driver, but the personality, the
Yep. And the
struggles.
controversial moments and that deep, deep drive that defined him.
Exactly. Senna's story, it just goes so far beyond the statistics, doesn't it?
Hmm.
It's about pushing the absolute boundaries of human capability, wrestling with profound internal question,
Navigating those intense rivalries.
and of course, the shocking circumstances that brought his life to an end. It's a story of immense talent and, well, just relentless will.
Right. It's captivating stuff, and its impact is still felt today. So let's jump right in, starting at the beginning. The book really emphasizes Senna's dedication right from his karting days in Brazil.
That's one of the first clear insights the sources give us. Rubens Carpinelli, who was president of Brazil's National Karting Commission then, spotted his talent early.
And he said what? Something about him always being there.
Yeah, he put it simply. Every time I went to the kart track, he was there, training. It wasn't just showing up. It was constant, focused work, even as a kid.
And that focus, it paid off almost instantly in Brazil's junior categories.
Oh, incredibly fast. Within weeks of starting, he won the São Paulo Winter Championship junior category, then the full junior title that summer.
And the national championship the next year. I mean, rapid success is an understatement.
Completely. That kind of dominance quickly led him to Europe for karting in 1978.
And the competition there.
Well, the sources note it was a good deal fiercer than back home. Makes sense. But despite that, he still managed a sensational 6th overall in the 1978 World Championship. That's according to Karting magazine at the time.
Sensational for a first year in that environment. Wow.
Yeah, but even karting at that level, it carries risks. The book mentions his first big accident in 1979 at a track called Gesalo.
What happened there?
He was thrown out at like 50 mil pari into a steel barrier, and then his own cart hit him.
Ouch. Injured.
No injury, somehow, but definitely a major shock, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I bet. And this early period wasn't all smooth sailing either, was it? Funding issues.
Right. The sources reveal he was incredibly close to just giving up entirely, going back to Brazil because he didn't have the funds.
Really?
Yeah. It took persuasion from his father and his wife to keep him going. It really highlights, as the book says, that very fine line between fame and obscurity for young drivers.
So it was his sheer desire to race that pulled him back,
Seems so. That burning desire just wouldn't let him quit.
which then led him back to England in 1982 for Formula Ford 2000 with Dennis Russian.
Yeah, and there's a brilliant story in the book about Russian's first sighting of Senna.
Oh, yeah.
It was in a FF 1600 race at Snetterton the year before, pouring rain. Russians saw this little yellow and black car just dominating.
How much dominating?
Well, he said the first time he saw it, it was in the lead. The next time they came past, he was in the lead by half a lap.
In the rain, half a lap.
Yeah. That kind of natural talent in tricky conditions was just immediately obvious.
And by the end of 82,
Dominance was complete. He won basically every major prize in Formula Ford.
nowadays, a driver with that kind of record, they'd probably be straight into F1, wouldn't they?
Oh, almost certainly. But back then, the path was different. That traditional apprenticeship, usually through Formula 3, was pretty much expected.
Right.
But even then, his talent was so undeniable that F1 teams were already knocking.
Like who?
The sources mention both McLaren and Tolman offering to finance his entire F3 career. We're talking £100,000 plus a salary.
Wow, that's huge for F3. What was the catch?
Long contracts. They wanted to tie him down.
And Senna.
Turn them down. Here's an early glimpse of that fierce independence. He refused to be a team slave, as the book puts it. Ron Dennis at McLaren was apparently pretty stunned.
That independence, that intensity.
Yeah.
It was definitely on display in his 1983 British F3 season, the rivalry with Martin Brundle.
Oh, yeah, that was fierce. The sources detail several clashes, Brundle winning after Senna spun at Silverstone.
Senna crashing, trying to keep up at Cadwell Park.
And then that big collision at Snetterton.
Tell us about that one. Brundle's description is pretty vivid, isn't it?
It really is. He said Senna went for a gap that was barely half a car width, just expecting Brundle to yield.
And Brundle didn't.
Nope. They touched, Senna's car went airborne. Brundle said he saw the rivets on the underside, and
Jeez.
Brundle felt Senna stayed on the gas and tried to T-bone me at the S's. He said it typified Senna's ruthless determination.
That determination certainly got noticed by the F1 teams. The book talks about that famous Williams F1 test session, July 19th, 1983, at Donington Park.
Yeah, and he earned that test, didn't he? By winning the F3 support race for the British Grand Prix just days before. Pole, fastest lap, the works.
And as the sources point out, that's such a contrast to today. Winning that race like that now, you'd probably get an F1 drive immediately.
Exactly. Back then, it just got you a test.
Yeah.
Shows how things have changed.
There's also that remarkable, almost chilling irony here. His first F1 test was with Williams.
And tragically, his last race would be in a Williams 11 years later.
Peter Collins, who was the Williams team manager then, recalled how the test even came about. Apparently, Senna just happened to sit next to Frank Williams on a flight.
Just like that.
Seems so.
Yeah.
And Senna absolutely delivered in the test. Took the Williams around Donington faster than anyone had ever done before.
Incredible. But despite that stunning test, getting into F1 in '84 wasn't straightforward.
Why not? The talent was obvious.
Well, the sources explain the top teams had their driver lineups pretty much set. Lotus had DeAngelis, Williams had Lafayette and Rosberg, McLaren had Lauda and Watson. And then Alain Prost replaced Watson at McLaren, so that door closed too.
Right. And the book also highlights a blocked opportunity at Brabham.
Yeah. Nelson Piquet, Brazil's reigning F1 star at the time, apparently didn't want another potentially faster Brazilian as his teammate.
Politics already.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
Piquet had recognized Senna's talent and, according to the sources, had taken a dislike to him early on, even snubbed him when Senna tried to introduce himself back in '82 at Zolder.
So all that led him to make his F1 debut with Toleman, a smaller team.
Right. And he showed incredible flashes of brilliance there, obviously. That legendary wet race in Monaco in '84.
Unforgettable.
But his time there was also plagued by reliability issues, tire dramas, turbo problems, the usual struggles for a smaller team back then.
His exit from Toleman was also a bit messy, wasn't it? The sources don't really pull punches there.
No, they don't. He got banned for the Italian Grand Prix because Toleman signed a tire deal with Goodyear without consulting him, apparently. And then he announced he was off to Lotus.
How was that received?
Well, one journalist at the time called his behavior a simple case of bad manners and lack of discipline. Senna's view, though, was that he'd made his intentions clear much earlier. So, yeah, a controversial end to that first F1 chapter.
So, moving to Lotus.
Yeah.
That was partly because he respected the designer, Gerard Ducarouge.
Yes, that was a factor. But there's a really fascinating detail in the book about his connection to the team's history.
Oh, yeah, well, that's that.
He apparently had this real fascination with Colin Chapman's old office at Ketteringham Hall, the Lotus base.
Chapman's office. It was still there.
Preserved exactly as it was the day Chapman died. And Senna would apparently spend hours in there alone, just gazing out, imagining the greats who drove for Chapman, Rindt, Hill, Clark, Andretti, Fittipaldi.
Wow, that says a lot about his respect for the sport's history.
It really does. However, the book also points out a bit of a contrast there.
How so?
While Senna was connecting with the past in that office, Team Lotus itself, under Peter Warr, was kind of lagging behind technologically. Rivals like McLaren and Williams were building these massive high-tech factories.
And Lotus wasn't.
They were holding onto their traditional base, sort of gradually losing their technical edge.
But despite those limitations, Senna delivered some moments of pure genius at Lotus. That 1985 Portuguese Grand Prix is a classic example from the sources.
Absolutely, pouring rain again. Lotus had just introduced tire warmers, a new thing then, and by qualifying, other teams were quickly copying them.
And Senna
just kept pushing. His final pole lap apparently wasn't even perfect. He said he wanted to get rid of some understeer, but the car felt safe enough to go more.
What did the other drivers think?
Well, John Watson, driving for McLaren that weekend, watched Senna's lap and was just gobsmacked.
Gobsmacked.
Yeah. He described seeing Senna's car dancing, like rain dancing on the pavement.
Yeah.
And he realized instantly that his own time as a Grand Prix driver was effectively finished.
That's a powerful statement about Senna's raw speed, especially in those conditions.
It really is. That '85 season brought him 2 wins, 7 poles, finished 4th overall.
And his teammate, Elio De Angelis. The sources suggest it wasn't a smooth relationship.
Apparently not. De Angelis didn't find him an agreeable teammate, which led to De Angelis leaving. Senna became the clear team leader after that.
But the following years at Lotus, '86 and '87, They weren't quite championship contenders, were they?
No, the sources suggest the car lacked the consistency needed in '86. And in '87, they struggled with the new fuel allowance rules, plus they lacked an experienced teammate like Derek Warwick, instead having Satoru Nakajima, who wasn't really at the same level to help push development or challenge Senna.
Okay, so this is when he really started looking elsewhere, McLaren specifically.
Exactly. He'd talked to Ron Dennis before, but now he started pushing harder.
And the book highlights a crucial piece of leverage Senna had. Something about Honda.
Yes. He knew he could persuade Honda, whose relationship with Williams was souring, to supply engines to McLaren in 1988.
So bringing Honda with him was key.
A major, major factor in securing that McLaren seat. Big move.
His arrival at McLaren in 1988, well, that coincided with the debut of the MP44 car. Just dominant.
Utterly dominant. An incredible machine. Won 15 out of 16 races that year. Senna took 8 wins, and his new teammate, Alain Prost, took 7.
What a season. And that season also introduced Senna to Joseph Leberer, who became his physio and a very close friend.
Yeah, Leberer's first memory of Senna, mentioned in the sources, really humanizes him.
What was that?
At the first race, Senna's engine failed. Leberer was exhausted from cooking for him and everything, but Senna called him later and invited him out with friends.
Even after a retirement.
Yeah. Leberer was genuinely amazed that this Brazilian hero was thinking about him. He described Senna with his friends as a different person, so friendly and funny, even switching languages so Leberer could join in. Nice touch.
That's great. But the other relationship that defined 1988 was the one with Alain Prost.
Oh, absolutely explosive. You had 2 championship-caliber drivers in the same dominant car. Prost, already a double champion with 26 wins.
And Senna, with 6 wins, but clearly this rising force. And neither of them liked losing.
Not one bit. As Keke Rosberg famously said, "Show me a good loser and I'll show you a loser." Neither Senna nor Prost fit that description.
And the intense rivalry, it really ignited at the 1988 Portuguese Grand Prix, didn't it?
It did. Prost had pole, Senna got a better start. End of the first lap, Prost pulls out to pass on the main straight, doing maybe 190 miles per hour.
Side by side.
And Senna moves across, nudging Prost perilously close to the pit wall.
Scary moment.
Incredibly dangerous. Prost needed amazing car control to avoid a massive accident.
And Prost's reaction afterwards.
According to the sources, he called the move dangerous and essentially said if Senna wanted the title that badly, he could have it.
Oof. So that was the spark.
The book notes this incident marked the undeniable start of the real enmity between them. No going back.
Despite that tension, Senna achieved his goal in 1988, won his first world championship at the Japanese Grand Prix. He was 28.
Yeah. And this is where his deep spirituality really comes into the story in a big way.
How so?
As he crossed the line, he looked up, thanked God, and later told journalists he had seen God in that moment.
Wow. And the sources highlight a major spiritual transformation that season, linked to the Monaco crash.
Yes, particularly after his crash while leading easily at Monaco. He described that mistake as a turning point, said it woke him up psychologically, mentally.
How did he put it?
He felt it brought him closer to God than I've ever been and changed my life completely, making him a better human being. He saw the accident as a signal that God was there, waiting to give me a hand.
That's quite profound.
From that point on, he said God spoke to him, answered his prayers through passages in the Bible. He'd seek guidance, open the Bible, and find verses about courage, determination, strength.
He felt God was talking directly to him.
That's how he described it. God is immediately there talking to me.
This deep religious conviction, it must have been controversial.
It was, yeah. It was profoundly personal, but it did attract criticism. Some people, including Prost apparently, worried he might take more risks because he believed God would protect him.
How did Senna react to that?
He was hurt by it and eventually just stopped discussing his faith openly, except maybe with his closest friends.
But what's undeniable is his record after that Monaco mistake.
Yeah, exactly. After that single mistake in Monaco '88, Senna went on to win the next 5 Monaco Grand Prix in a row. 5 straight.
Incredible consistency.
Yeah.
Moving into 1989, the rivalry with Prost just escalated.
Oh, big time. The incident at Imola that year is a prime example from the sources.
What happened there? The agreement.
Yeah, apparently Senna and Prost had this secret plan before the race not to race each other until the Tosa corner, the first real braking zone.
Okay. But the race was stopped.
Right, after Gerhard Berger had that absolutely horrifying, fiery crash at Tamburello, miraculously he survived with serious burns, but not life-threatening injuries.
Thank goodness. So the second start.
Prost took the lead initially, but Senna immediately broke their accord. overtook Prost at Tosa on the very first lap.
Broke the agreement, just like that.
Yep. Pulled out a huge lead, won by 40 seconds. Prost was absolutely furious.
I can imagine.
He reported the breach to Ron Dennis, stormed off, skipped the press conference, even left the circuit by helicopter, got fined $5,000 for that.
And Senna's side of it, he later claimed Dennis forced him to apologize.
Yes, that's what the sources say. Senna felt Dennis forcing him to apologize made it worse and was the real trigger for the serious hostilities that lasted right up until May 1994.
So he felt if he hadn't been made to apologize for breaking an agreement he suggested, things might have stayed okay.
That seems to be his perspective, yeah. That the forced apology was the point of no return.
Which leads us to the championship decider that year, the collision at Suzuka.
Oh, the big one. Prost accused Senna of doing it deliberately, saying Senna saw Prost's car was better that day.
What words did Prost use?
Called it disgusting, more than unsporting, said Senna had completely destroyed everything again. And crucially, not prepared to fight against irresponsible people who are not afraid to die. Very strong stuff.
And Senna's initial reaction?
He denied it, blamed Prost. But a year later,
He admitted it.
the sources reveal he admitted it was deliberate revenge for 1989.
Revenge? How so?
He said after Jean-Marie Balestre, the FISA president, refused to change the pole position side for the 1990 Japanese GP, putting Senna on the dirtier side, he promised himself if he lost the first corner, he wouldn't let the other car, Prost's car, get through cleanly.
Wow, so it was conscious retaliation.
A clear act of retaliation for what he saw as unfair treatment the year before, and maybe for the Balestre decision too.
Senna's complex nature wasn't just about the rivalries, though. Contract negotiations could be pretty tough too, right?
Yeah, the book mentions the talks for his 1990 deal. Landed at $15 million for 1 year. Ron Dennis admitted being bruised by the process.
Why bruised? Just the money.
Partly, maybe. But Senna, according to the sources, carried some distrust of Dennis from an earlier incident in 1988. Something about Dennis suggesting tossing a coin for $500,000, which Senna felt implied a larger sum over a longer period. It just rankled him.
Interesting dynamic. For 1990, Gerhard Berger joined McLaren as his teammate. How did Senna view him?
Well, the book notes Senna saw Berger as faster than Prost, potentially, but lacking that ultimate killer instinct that Senna and Prost share.
Killer instinct. Meaning what?
Senna felt Berger would prioritize, say, $1 million over a Grand Prix win. That was the key difference in their mindset, in Senna's view.
And Berger's perspective on being Senna's teammate?
Berger saw Senna as the dominant factor at McLaren. Simple as that. The best driver in the world, unbelievable personality, everyone supported him. But Berger also said Senna never made me feel less because of that. And he felt the team was actually happy if he won too, perhaps because Berger was more open, less intense than Prost maybe.
Interesting. Senna was also deeply affected by the sport's dangers, wasn't he? The Martin Donnelly accident in 1990.
Oh, absolutely. That horrifying crash at Jerez, where Donnelly's Lotus just disintegrated after hitting a barrier. That was Senna's first serious brush with tragedy, according to the book.
Did he stop at the scene?
Yes, he was one of only 2 drivers who did. He found it very difficult to cope and maintain my mental balance after seeing the immediate aftermath.
Understandable. Did it affect his driving?
The book says he even considered not running in qualifying that day. He had some special moments on his own to compose himself, and then incredibly went out and took pole position.
Just compartmentalized it somehow. Amazing focus.
By 1993, after Jean-Marie Balestre was no longer FISA president, Senna became much more outspoken in his criticism.
Using some colorful language, apparently.
Yeah, the sources mention earthy English expletives. He claimed his 1989 apology to FISA was just theater, faked by Balestre's press release.
He was frustrated about drivers not being able to speak freely.
Deeply frustrated, he said, "If you say what you feel, you get penalized, disqualified, fined, banned, or lose your license. Is that a fair way of working? It is not." He even indirectly blamed Balestre for causing that 1990 Suzuka crash with Prost by not letting the pole side be changed.
Wow, holding nothing back then. Beyond the racing and the politics, though, his philanthropy was a huge part of his life, often kept private.
Hugely significant, yes. The sources state he gave away something like $4 million a year to the poor in São Paulo. It troubled his conscience, apparently.
And that work continues today.
Yes, through the Ayrton Senna Foundation, a major part of his legacy.
He also found a necessary balance in his life through nature back in Brazil.
Absolutely. He described it as his paradise, the beautiful ocean and beautiful vegetation, a place to recharge my batteries, get away from the pressure, find his equilibrium.
Essential for that level of intensity, I guess.
Yeah.
In the final phase of his life, 1993, 1994, he was in a relationship with Adrienne Galisteu.
Yes. Their meeting is noted in the book, ironically, at a Shell event that involved Nelson Piquet and her commercial.
And she stood him up initially.
She did. After hearing other girls were invited to the dinner he'd suggested. Funny start.
Their time together gave some glimpses into his life away from the track.
Yeah, like at the '93 Monaco GP, she was apparently quite surprised by the blatant attention he got from girls at the nightclub Jimmy's.
I can imagine.
They shared what she described as magical evenings, like being serenaded at the Hungarian GP in '93. Those famous photos were taken then. A publisher at that party was convinced they'd marry.
He seemed serious about her.
It seems so. He bought her a car, spent significant time with her in Brazil. According to the book, he even considered stepping away from racing at one point while with her.
Really? But ultimately, racing remained the absolute focus.
All-consuming. He openly admitted it controlled him. Everything in my life is aimed at the point when I sit in my car on the grid, he said.
How did he describe that focus?
Searching deeper and deeper inside, which takes you to a different world. Finding new things. He said he was totally dependent at this moment on winning, even comparing it to a drug addict needing his fix. He felt this intense drive dictated everything, good and bad.
His intelligence, too. It wasn't just about driving, was it?
No, the sources note his wisdom went far beyond his years. He applied that intelligence to the whole business of living, not just racing.
Thinking about life beyond racing.
Yeah, he even mused about needing multiple lives, saying you'd need a third life and a fourth because you'd never truly understand life fully in just one. And he repeatedly referred to the Bible as the best book, where you could find all the explanations and all the answers.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the final chapter. That long-awaited move to Williams for the 1994 season.
Yeah, seen as a well-suited and well-timed alliance. McLaren was declining, Williams was on the rise, and he had that excellent relationship with Frank Williams. It almost felt destined.
But this move had huge repercussions for Alain Prost.
Oh, massive. The book notes Prost was incensed. Senna was joining Williams. He believed a no-Senna clause in his own contract applied beyond 1993.
So Senna's arrival basically pushed Prost out.
Effectively, yes. It pushed Prost into retirement, even though he could have potentially driven a car capable of matching Fangio's record of 5 titles. Prost announced his retirement just 2 weeks later, clearly affected.
And Senna's initial impressions of that Williams FW16 car in testing, not what he expected.
Not really. Publicly, he praised the team, but the sources say he told Adrienne privately, the car drives funny and it's gonna be hard.
Why? What was wrong?
He felt he hadn't adapted to it, or maybe it just didn't suit him. The book suggests he might have naively expected to sit down and find the perfect car, like he did with the McLaren MP44 back in '88.
And his concerns weren't just about performance, right? Safety was a big issue for him with that car.
A huge issue. The car was stripped of all the electronic aids, active suspension, traction control banned for 1994. He found it potentially dangerous.
He thought banning the aids was stupid.
Yeah, called it stupidity to change the rules. Argued Formula One will regress, saying these aids were actually safety features. He was also really unhappy about in-race refueling returning, calling it unnecessarily dangerous and destabilizing.
Prophetic words, almost. Which takes us to that tragic 1994 San Marino Grand Prix weekend in Imola.
A dark weekend from the start. The atmosphere was already tense, then became utterly somber after Roland Ratzenberger's fatal accident during Saturday qualifying.
How did Senna react to Ratzenberger's death?
The sources describe him being devastated, cried on Professor Sid Watkins' shoulder. It was his first time experiencing close proximity to a death in motorsport. Really shook him.
Race day, May 1st, 1994. That famous photo of him in the garage.
Yeah, contemplating. The book starkly notes he had under 30 minutes to live. He completed less than 7 laps before the accident. High-speed Tamburello corner, lap 7, just after a safety car period.
The immediate aftermath. The sources recount it in difficult detail.
Professor Sid Watkins assessed him right there at the track medical center, found him clinically dead. Watkins, being so close to Senna, knew there was nothing the hospital could really do. Doubted he could last long.
And Joseph Leberer saw Watkins' reaction.
Yeah, Leberer saw the look on Watkins' face and just knew it was going to be a very serious thing.
He was helicoptered to Maggiore Hospital. They tried to restart his heart.
They did. It stopped again around 3:07 p.m. before he was placed on life support. Professor Watkins later stated that even if Senna had survived the severe brain damage, he'd have been profoundly handicapped, totally incapacitated, something Senna would never have wanted.
The sources are pretty clear about the severity of the injuries.
Yes, they note that survivors of such accidents suffer terrible, irreversible brain damage. The book is direct, stating that, by any normal standards, Senna was dead on impact with the wall.
And millions saw it happen live on TV.
200 million viewers witnessed his last spasm of life in the cockpit, as the book puts it. His body was essentially untouched except for the devastating head injuries.
Back in Brazil, the news must have spread like wildfire.
Instantly. The sources describe streets in major cities falling eerily quiet as the entire country just watched television, hoping against hope.
And the commentator, Galvão Bueno,
Had the heartbreaking task of conveying the news to the nation, including Senna's own family, who were watching his broadcast, clinging to hope even after warnings of severe brain damage.
Adrienne Galisteu, arrived at the family home later that night.
Just after midnight. Couldn't bring herself to sleep in his room, found it too overwhelming. Meanwhile, at the track, the media center was preparing obituaries, and his shattered car in the pit garage was guarded by armed police. Just a grim scene.
The funeral in São Paulo, described as an extraordinary affair.
The whole city basically came to a standstill. Past and present drivers attended, including, notably, Alain Prost. The family held a service, placed an old helmet on his coffin.
The book mentions Bernie Ecclestone wasn't initially invited by the family.
Right. They asked him not to attend initially, but he visited the grave later. Highlights their closeness, though Bernie's daughters apparently saw Senna as an uncle.
And the family's reaction to the race restarting.
They were critical, viewed it as an outrage, disrespectful, though the sources note they perhaps didn't realize races always continued under such circumstances in F1 back then.
Understandable reaction, though. Then came the Italian investigation and that long, controversial manslaughter trial against Williams personnel.
Yeah, Adrian Newey, Patrick Head, Frank Williams. It was complex, highly charged. The book describes an unusual court atmosphere, prosecutor Passerini accusing them of lying.
And hysterical media coverage.
Yeah, and this strong feeling in Italy that the English team had somehow killed Senna and were trying to get away with it via an Anglo-Saxon conspiracy. Williams ended up spending around $4 million just on legal fees.
So, what were the main technical arguments during that trial based on the sources? What caused the crash?
Okay, several key theories were debated. First, the steering column failure. Everyone agreed it broke, but when? Before impact or after?
Passerini said before, Williams said after.
Exactly. Neither could definitively prove it. But the sources note a weakness in the Williams argument. There were signs of metal fatigue, and experts were critical of how the modification to the column had been done.
The video footage
Seemed to show Senna's steering working just before the crash, which made a before failure seem less likely to some. It was messy.
Okay, what was the second main theory? Power steering.
Yeah, a power steering malfunction. That was a view held by many for a long time. Could it have locked the steering somehow?
Is there any evidence?
Telemetry from the Renault black box did show hydraulic pressure rising suddenly and then falling suddenly for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
But a former McLaren designer, quoted in the book, points out you'd normally expect the pressure to go straight to zero if it broke completely. Passerini pushed this theory, but didn't have direct proof it caused the crash. Power steering was disabled on Damon Hill's sister car after the accident, just as a precaution.
And Williams' main defense, they blamed the track.
Their argument focused on track bumps causing oversteer, right near where Senna went off at Tamburello. Their lawyer tried to shift blame to the track director, surface problems.
But there was video evidence about the track surface, too.
Crucially, yes. An amateur video emerged showing Senna himself talking to track director Giorgio Paggi about dips in the asphalt at Tamburello before the race. And those dips were apparently fixed the next day.
Which leads to that profound point the sources make. Senna could have potentially prevented it.
The book argues, controversially perhaps, that Senna had the ability to save his own life right there. If he or any driver had simply asked for tire barriers against that concrete wall at Tamburello.
They would have been installed.
Without question, the sources suggest. Why he and others didn't ask for barriers at arguably the most dangerous corner on the whole calendar. It remains an enduring mystery.
And the book dismisses the counter-argument about cars bouncing back.
Calls it fatuous, yeah. Thinks the safety benefit far outweighed that risk.
So where did the investigation end up? Steering column fatigue was confirmed.
Independent lab reports did eventually confirm fatigue in the steering column. The prosecution also used Senna's lap time after the restart, the third fastest lap of the entire race, to argue against theories suggesting a gradual problem like tire pressure loss.
And there was testimony about his final inputs.
Yes, an engineering professor testified that Senna turned the steering wheel firmly left just before impact, suggesting he realized something was wrong with the steering. He also eased the accelerator and braked, showing incredible reaction time that prevented an even earlier crash. Williams' engineers countered, saying it was just him correcting oversteer from hitting a bump. Still debated.
After the tragedy, Senna's sister, Vian da Silva, stepped up.
Yes. She became the family representative. The book notes she'd previously avoided the limelight completely, working as a child therapist, but took on this public role because the rest of the family just couldn't.
What's absolutely undeniable, though, is the impact Senna's death had on Formula One safety.
Massive. Immediate and lasting. Bernie Ecclestone, Max Mosley, Professor Sid Watkins, they moved incredibly quickly to implement huge safety changes. Cars, circuits, everything.
And a result.
The sources state that since Senna and Ratzenberger's deaths that weekend, no driver has been killed or even seriously injured during a Formula One race itself. The sport became remarkably safer, a direct legacy of that terrible weekend.
So ultimately, the sources paint this picture of Ayrton Senna as, well, incredibly complex.
Hugely contrasting and complex, yeah. One moment, as the book describes, absorbed and lost in the Bible. The next, ruthlessly disposing of fellow competitors on the track.
His talent excused a lot.
His vast talent and intelligence excused his behavior on many occasions, the book suggests. And they were clearly the secrets of his speed, making his career a triumph of mind over matter. His legacy lives on: the racing, the philosophy, the charity work through the foundation.
So that brings us towards the end of this deep dive, using the sources, into the life of Ayrton Senna. We've gone from that relentless early ambition, those almost unbelievable aha moments in junior formulas,
Through the incredibly intense rivalries, the profound personal and spiritual struggles at the absolute pinnacle of F1.
to that heartbreaking final weekend at Imola, and the complex, debated aftermath and investigation that followed.
We've really seen the intertwined nature of the man. The deeply spiritual side, finding answers in the Bible, quietly giving millions to charity.
And the fiercely driven, sometimes ruthless, sometimes controversial competitor who pushed limits few others could even comprehend.
And we've highlighted the profound, necessary, and thankfully life-saving impact his death had on the safety of the sport he loved.
So maybe the thought to leave you with is this. Given all the differing accounts, the enduring mystery around the precise technical cause of that Imola crash, and the radical safety transformation that followed, what does Ayrton Senna's life and death ultimately teach us?
Yeah, not just about chasing human limits in extreme fields like F1, but maybe about the price of progress, the complex nature of genius itself, and the kind of lasting legacy left when a life is lived with such incredible intensity.
It's a story and a question that definitely continues to resonate deeply even today.